On today's podcast, we will be discussing some sensitive topics. Some language may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
American 11, are you trying to call?
The cockpit is not answering their phone. Our number 1 has been staffed, and our 5 has been staffed.
I am going to call from Washington. I am in a situation with American 11, a possible hijack.
What's going on, Betty? The craft is erratic again. Problems very erratic.
Senior year in high school, sitting in my math class. Girl walked in to drop off some paperwork to one of the teachers and said, plane had hit the World Trade Center. I'm thinking, Cessna plane, small plane, and turn on the TV in the classroom and we see the first tower had been hit. Still, at 18, you don't understand the magnitude of that like I do now, being in the job and knowing all the ins and outs of what that all entailed that day.
The plane just hit the World Trade Center. What? It's a 737.
It what?
Like the World Trade Center.
Who are you talking to?
Oh, God. Oh, my God.
United 175, New York. We have some problems over here right now. We might have a hijack over here, 2 of them.
What are those people going to do?
Pentagon just got hit.
United 9-3, have you got information on that yet?
Yeah, he's down.
He's down?
Yes.
When did he land?
He did not land.
Oh, he's down?
I hope to be able to see your face again, baby. I love you. Bye.
You hear all those phone calls and all that stuff and get you.
So we're here at Prosper Fire Station 1, their central fire station, in this beautiful 9/11 museum that they have here.
Only mobile memorial in the country is what I've been told.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this trailer with a piece of the World Trade Center on it.
The chief was pointing out some little bits of concrete in there, some debris from the
Oh, really?
from the collapse.
Yeah, we have a piece of steel at my department too, but not this big. So this is an impressive thing. On a trailer, this is the mobile part you talked about.
Yeah, and this was actually built by the Gas Monkey Garage. The Gas Monkey guys, they did this.
Oh, cool. Specifically for this.
Specifically for the piece. And so back, I think it was around 2005, one of our current fire chief and a couple other firefighters and another who's now a battalion chief, they drove to New York to pick this piece up and brought it back.
Yeah. I think that's cool that they did that they didn't just scrap it all. And like I said, my department has a small piece. I know several other. This is the biggest piece I've seen, so that's cool. But we wanted to do this podcast today because it's be coming up on the 23rd anniversary of 9/11, the terrorist attacks on 9/11. And so you and I were both alive. We're old guys, so we were both alive at that time. So we might talk to some people that were maybe young, maybe some people that weren't born yet on 9/11.
Danny, thank you for being willing to share your story. Danny, where were you the day the towers went down?
So I was in a little small town where I grew up called Houston. I was 7 years old and I was in the 3rd grade. So a lot of my memories are fairly vague, but I do remember when it happened, a lot of the teachers crying. I remember them rushing us into this hallway, and we had our textbooks were pretty thick and hardcover, and so we used them to cover our head in the hallway. And I just remember for like 3 hours on our knees with these hard textbooks covering our head, and teachers kind of crying and just having the TV on. They're running back and forth trying to keep us calm and watching the TV, and that's a lot of what I remember.
Like we were talking about, we always say, especially with 9/11, we will never forget, or never forget is always a term people, but as the years go by, people tend to forget. And so as a matter of fact, we will never forget, says it right there on the window here.
Yeah.
So I think it's important, especially as first responders, that we don't ever forget and we revisit these things and remind the generations. Like you and I, this was a lot of people say that for Generation X, it was our JFK assassination. Like for our parents, JFK assassination was this huge event, right? Well, 9/11 obviously was a massive event. I don't think there's been an event like that since.
Well, some people
Hopefully
may. Like some of the younger folks, maybe COVID, but
Yeah, that was certainly a different kind of event. But,
I
so
know.
where were you 9/11?
I was in Los Angeles. I was a teacher at the time and a volunteer firefighter, and I'll never forget, that morning. And I was on the West Coast.
So was I.
And so it was before I was going to work. We turned on the news. A friend called us and said, "Hey, turn on the news." And it was so sobering. And like you said, I'll never forget it. It's unforgettable. But when you're in a place like this, or like if you've been to the memorial in New York City.
Yeah, you recently went
I was there this year,
Yeah.
in March and April-ish time frame, and I'll never forget it. I mean, it was, it's a different level of remembrance, I guess. I couldn't even make it through the whole, I mean, there are two kind of separate parts to the memorial, the museum or whatever, and I couldn't get through the whole thing. I felt this, like a nausea, and I just told my wife, I was like, "I'll wait for you outside."
Yeah.
And so I just sat next to it's like an open, where the tower was.
Yeah.
The big kind of
It's got the waterfall and all the names.
I just sat out there waiting for my group to come back out. It was really difficult. And I know, I mean, I was a volunteer for a while and I worked closely with firefighters, but it's I think for you, it's maybe another level of reality, maybe.
I don't know. I mean,
I
I wasn't a firefighter at that time. I became a firefighter in 2004, so I was not a firefighter on 9/11. I was actually in college, taking some college classes. I'd been married about a year, and we were at home. I had the Today Show on, which you see that playing in the background, and we just had it on while I was getting ready for school, and my wife was getting ready for work, and obviously it was once the first plane hit the tower, then they cut over to it like, oh, they're thinking it was an accident. Like, oh, somebody lost their way and accidentally hit the World Trade Center. Yeah. And then as we were watching, you see the other one come in, and then you're like, oh, this isn't, I mean, I think they even said it on the news, like, oh, this isn't an accident.
Yeah.
And then, then you heard about, there was 4 planes total. Shortly after that, one went into the Pentagon, and then shortly after that, the last one went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Where on that one, as you know, the passengers of that plane, because the first couple planes, nobody knew what was going on. The terrorists kind of said, like, hey, just let us do our thing. We're not going to hurt anybody. We're just going to reroute over here. They had no idea what they were doing. Well, obviously, the people on the plane that ended up crashing in Pennsylvania, they were calling people, and they were telling them, like, hey, there's already been 2 planes. They're going to crash this plane into something. You got to do something. And so heroes, undoubtedly, several of the passengers on the plane said, we're not going to let this happen. And then took over, and unfortunately the plane crashed, but it didn't.
Let's roll.
Yeah, let's roll.
That was actually one of my favorite parts of the 9/11 memorial in New York, was that they had a whole area for that, and that was very special.
I think, a lot of people saying it's true. Unfortunately, we're in a time in our country where there's a lot of divisiveness. And a lot of people say, I wish we could go back to September 12th of 2001, because there was none of that.
No.
We were all Americans. Didn't matter your political views or any of that stuff. We were all united in one thing, like, hey, somebody just attacked us, and there was a lot of pride. A lot of the heroes that went into those buildings and didn't come out. The FDNY, I mean, I can't imagine. I've seen several documentaries and stories of those guys, and I just couldn't imagine, as a firefighter, I could not imagine looking at those 110-story, 1,300-foot tall buildings, and the top of them, is a plane, a massive plane has crashed into these things. They're engulfed in fire, and you're running up in full gear. They weren't running, but they're making their way up 100 stories just to go to work. Like, once you climb 100 stories, some of them, I've heard stories that there were some of the elevators that were still operable, and they were able to get to like maybe the 40th or 50th floor. But still, I mean, to hike 100 stories in full gear is no easy feat. And then once you get there, now you're going to go to work and try to put out this massive fire.
With a fire. Above, I mean, that's...
Jet fuel. I mean, that just ran down the elevator shafts and all these crazy things. And yeah, just I couldn't imagine doing that. And the story, one of the battalion chiefs, Oriole Palmer, I believe was his name, he was one of the first guys on the scene, super fit guy, was a marathon runner, just started booking it.
Yeah.
I mean, just no hesitation at booking it up the towers, and was calling in reports of what he was running into as he was going up, guiding people down. Just keep going down, keep going down. And I think when he got to the fire floor, whichever floor he hit, 100th floor, whatever, and then shortly thereafter is when the tower collapsed.
Yeah, I think I was reading over there. It's like the 93rd floor or something, or 77 to 85. No, the first one hit 93 to 99. That's what it was. Yeah.
And the architects and the engineers of the World Trade Centers, which were the tallest buildings when they were built, were the tallest buildings in the world at the time.
That's right.
And the engineers did not think, they actually thought of this scenario of a plane crashing into these buildings. And they thought the way that they designed it and engineered it, that it wouldn't take the buildings down. So they had this confidence that this couldn't happen. Mm-hmm. And then obviously, you know, we know that it did happen, unfortunately. But yeah, so I was getting ready to go to school. I was taking some classes. My wife was working. And like I said, we saw it on the news and realized pretty quickly, like, oh, this is an attack. This isn't an accidental plane crash.
David, thank you for being willing to share your story and your memories of 9/11. Take us back to when the towers fell. What do you remember?
So on the day of 9/11, I was in school. I was in 10th grade. I remember just catching wind that the first plane had crashed into the World Trade Center.
And you were in New York.
And I was in New York, yes. I was born and raised in West Babylon, Long Island, which is about 16 miles outside of Manhattan. And obviously a lot of the people that live where I live, their parents worked in Manhattan. And what was crazy about that day, that I'm sure, you know, in all the documentaries they say, they shut everything down. As soon as the second plane hit and they realized it was an attack, they shut that. There was no way to communicate with anybody that was in the city. They shut down the bridges, the tunnels, so people were walking home. And I just remember it being a very eerie feeling. You know, New York's not often quiet, but you walking home, you could hear like a pin drop. So coming to this memorial, it does a good job of capturing the heaviness of the event. When you walk in and you see the footage and all the stuff that they got here, I think it's pretty powerful and shows a great depiction of what happened that day and the people that sacrificed themselves to do our job, what I do now. And I totally understand. I would have done the same thing a lot of those guys did. So it's not something you think about, you just react and try to help people. So I think they do a tremendous job with the beam and all the artifacts they have. It's probably one of the better ones I've been to, besides obviously Manhattan.
You brought up a good reminder, I think, to all of us, is to remember not just the tragedy of it, but to remember the unity in it too.
Yeah.
As like at that day, political differences didn't matter.
Yeah.
Those differences were kind of thrown out the window, and we were all Americans. Yep. Who experienced a tragedy, yep. An attack against our country.
Yes.
Vicious attack for people who hate us, and to taste the attack against our freedom was something I think that unified us. And there's so many wonderful stories that you hear of people helping each other that maybe the previous day wouldn't have even talked to one another.
Exactly.
There's that unity. We can't forget that either.
Yep.
That's a really good point you brought up.
Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed.
America today is on bended knee in prayer for the people whose lives were lost here, for the workers who work here, for the families who mourn. This nation stands with the good people of New York City as we mourn the loss of thousands of our citizens. I can hear you. I can hear us soon.
Yeah, I think it's another important thing that we should not forget. The sacrifice, there was 2,996 people died on 9/11. I think it was 419 first responders, 343 firefighters. There was, I believe, 75 police officers and 13 EMS workers.
Got a great memory, Matt.
I don't know if those, I think those numbers they're pretty close to accurate, but I had to look them up. I don't
Total
have those.
number of people, though?
2,996 people, just under 3,000 people died total that day. And the other thing that is not included in that number is the amount of firefighters who worked on the pile for days after and were told, oh, it's safe, just wear a little, N95 mask or a little respirator or whatever. And I don't know the number, but I know there's been numerous firefighters that have got all kinds of weird blood cancers and had all kinds of weird medical issues that worked the pile for days after, trying to get their brothers and sisters, even just body part, and civilians, just trying to get anybody out, and have since lost their lives as a direct result of the terror attack. So the actual number of people that lost their lives because of 9/11, I don't know if that's ever been calculated, over and above what died that day. It's pretty sobering.
It really is. A positive story. One thing that really was inspiring to me that I learned post 9/11 I heard Rudy Giuliani speak, and one of things he learned from his dad, he shared in his talk about his preparation for 9/11, which I took, and is one of those things I've heard that I've used as an ER doctor, and I actually have many times, even during COVID, used what he said, and it really influenced me and my function as an ER doctor. His dad, Rudy Giuliani's dad, had told him, I may be misquoting him, but something to the effect of, over-prepare for the expected so you're prepared for the unexpected. His dad taught him that as a lawyer, and as a young lawyer he used that, and that was one of his mantras. So this is interesting. I don't know if you know this. Maybe I've shared this with you. Before the 9/11 attacks, Rudy Giuliani, again, aligning himself as a lawyer to what his dad had taught him, to over-prepare for the unexpected, to be prepared for the expected. He actually looked at their emergency plan in the city. He thought, well, what if the attack was against the World Trade Center tower somehow, and they weren't able to use that as their planned command center, because they planned to use the lobby of the World Trade Center towers as the command center for a disaster in Manhattan. The fact that it had actually happened to hit those buildings, the fact that Rudy Giuliani had talked about this and prepared for this, he made that command center mobile so they can actually move it. So they actually did move it, and because they moved it, it saved tons of lives too. And he also shared how in their planning meetings they talked about airplanes hitting buildings, and they prepared for that too. Again, over-prepare for the expected so you're prepared for the unexpected. And as an ER doctor, I think about that a lot. When I was called to help plan for COVID, for example, again, that mantra came up. Okay, what do we expect to happen? Let's over-prepare for that. And then we were prepared for unexpected things. So I think that was something positive I took from 9/11. It's something I use today. Did you take anything positive from the tragedy?
Just thinking about your quote, think about, if you worked for FDNY and you're thinking to yourself, like, planes are never going to hit these buildings. Like, that's 1 in a million. That's never going to happen. What if they had that mindset? What if their department, what if their leadership had the mindset like, or even down to the firefighter level, if they just like, oh, these guys are crazy, that's never going to happen, and they didn't prepare. How many more lives would have been lost because they were unprepared? And those guys, there's a documentary, we were talking about it this morning, that I've seen numerous times. It's a couple of French filmmaker brothers that were filming this rookie, his first year with the FDNY. Right?
I really want to watch that.
Oh,
that
it's in my opinion, especially from a firefighter perspective, it is the best documentary I've seen on 9/11.
Wow.
And I believe, I'm sure there's other footage, but I know that this is the most famous footage of the first plane hitting the tower, because the filmmakers are riding out, their station gets a call for a gas leak or a sewer leak or something like that. And the battalion chief and a couple of guys are on this street in Manhattan, and they got their little gas detector, and all of a sudden they hear this jet, and they all look up like, what? That obviously something unusual, and the cameraman pans up just in time to see that first plane go into the tower.
We just had a plane crash into level 4 of the World Trade Center. The tower number 1 is on fire. The whole outside of the building, there was just a huge explosion.
And they instantly, because it's their district, and they instantly know, like, oh, and the chief they knew exactly what to do. They went right there. He's calling in, a report of what's going on. They went into the command area. And I mean, those guys, like I say, absolute heroes. I mean, without question, those guys went into those buildings and went up those, those stairways safe. And if they weren't prepared, how many more people would have been lost? And I mean, that's something that we do. We got the Prosper guys out here right now. We're attached to their bay, and they're out checking off their rigs. We do that every morning. You're preparing. And a lot of people, they always say that with firefighters. It's not, you're not paid for what you do. You're paid for what you're prepared to do.
Yeah, being available and being prepared. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's another big reason why it's important not to forget days like 9/11, because we became united very quickly as a country, and we knew that was wrong.
Yeah, that was a huge positive. And since then, I think we've become more polarized as a country than we ever have. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it, whether it's social media or who knows what. But there's so much tension, and we're approaching another election here soon, and I think it'd be good just to remind everybody listening. Or I just hope maybe we could just try to remember the. When tragedy struck in 9/11/2001, we really were unified, very special. I think that's something not to forget.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and remember the sacrifice too. Remember the unity of the country, but remember the sacrifice of all the heroes, not just the firefighters and the police officers, the first responders, but the people on the plane, the civilians that stepped up. And I mean, I couldn't imagine being on that plane and knowing, like, we got to do something. The guts that it would take to charge those guys and do what they did. Just unbelievable heroism that they displayed. But then even our veterans, our military people who went over afterwards, and all the people who have since died in the war on terror and all those kind of things, regardless of political beliefs, they went over to fight for our country. And a lot of neat stories. A lot of the guys I've seen, that were in the military and they went overseas, a lot of them would get patches. They always remembered, this is why we're over here. Is because they attacked our country. They attacked us on our soil. And they had patches or stuff from different stations with FDNY, or they'd have FDN, some of them incorporated FDNY into their, whatever, company patches, and so that they never forgot, hey, this is what we're doing here. They never forgot their purpose of why they're over in Afghanistan or wherever fighting the enemy is because of 9/11. That's why we're here now.
Captain Wheeler, thank you so much for being willing to share your story today on 9/11. Take us back to that day when the towers went down. What do you remember?
I'll never forget the day, even though I was much younger than probably most people in the service today. I was in second grade. We were in class doing our normal stuff, and then we were young and didn't really understand what was going on, but I could tell something happened because teachers were coming in and out, and everybody was acting weird and different. All the teachers were crying, and just everything was weird, but nobody would tell me or the other students what had happened. It wasn't on the TVs yet in school or on the radio, so I was just very confused. The bus driver, I remember he was crying most of the way on the route, but I remember looking at my mom and my sister and finally just yelled at them, like, why is everybody crying? I had no clue. and what that meant, and they were trying to explain it to me.
Think of all the different perspectives, some who weren't even alive.
Yeah, some of them who
young.
are firefighters now weren't even
Yeah.
alive. 22-year-old kids that weren't alive back then. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of firefighters who became firefighters because of this.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
inspired a lot of people to
Yeah.
maybe even join the military
Yep.
or become
for sure,
yeah.
for sure.
So many different ways to remember and honor
Yes.
the sacrifice and to remember, which is really the whole purpose of this, right? Is to remember today,
Yep.
September 9/11, 2001, and today, September 11th, 2024. I can't believe it's already been almost a quarter of a century.
Yeah, almost 25 years.
Wow.
It's, goes by fast.
Well, this has been an honor to do this today.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I love this room. It gives me chills every time I walk in here.